So last week, when we finished chapter 10, what had happened is that the Jews were going to stone Jesus again, as usual, and he left and he went to beyond Jordan where John had been baptizing. So it was a good experience for him because a lot of people responded to him there. So that's where he's at right now. And so after the Feast of Tabernacles, and then the Feast of Dedication, and then he went there. But when he was at that last feast, they completely rejected him. They rejected his works, they rejected his word, and they rejected his person. So I want you to remember that that's what he would be facing if he came back, because that's going to happen in this story. So let's start with chapter 11, verse 1. Now, a certain man was sick named Lazarus. He was of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So, this is a little family group, brother and two sisters, who had welcomed Jesus in their house before. So, he was their friend. I mean, can you imagine having Jesus as a house guest? That would just be unbelievable. And then in verse 2, where it says that Mary was the one that anointed his feet with oil and wiped it with her hair, we're going to come to that in the next chapter here. So I'll wait till we get to that. But when we're talking about Jesus raising someone from the dead, I want to talk about other people that he raised from the dead, because he's going to end up raising Lazarus, which everybody knows, so we're going to get to that part of the story. But in Mark 5:41, he raised a 12-year-old girl who had just died. And you know what he said to her? He spoke to her. He said, "Arise." You know what? She heard him. And she obeyed, and she got up. And then she started serving everybody. Then in Luke 7:14, there was a young man whose body was in like a open kind of a casket, and his mother was a widow. And this is her only son died. Just think about that. I've only got one son. So I know what this woman would have felt like. So she was crying, and they were carrying him out to the cemetery. Because one thing you need to know about was a Jewish custom was that they would bury people the same day that they died. And Jesus came upon this procession, and he told the woman to stop crying, and he called to the man, the young man, and he said, "Arise." Dead people hear him wherever they're at. And before Jesus died, actually, in Luke 16, we find out they were in paradise. And then when he raises Lazarus, he says to him, "Lazarus, come forth." He commands him. He's the God of the universe. And guess what? Even the dead obey him. Okay, so all the people that Jesus raised from the dead, and he raised more than these. Remember what we said? That only a little bit is written down about his miracles and the things that he did. But these people were not resurrected. They were restored to life. And I'm going to tell you what the difference is. Being restored to life means you're going to die again. But a resurrection body never dies. That's the difference. That wasn't resurrection. That was life restoration. But Jesus was the first person who ever resurrected. It says he was the first fruits of them that slept. And I want to read just a little bit about that. This is Corinthians 15:42-44. So also is a resurrection of the dead. Talking about our bodies. When we die, your soul doesn't die. Your body does. So it says, so also is a resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, and it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. Sown means it's put into the ground or burn up or whatever happened to it. It is raised a spiritual body. So this is telling you about the resurrection of the dead when Christ returns. What happens is when he returns, those dead bodies, they're going to stand up. I don't care if they're in a million pieces, they're going to come together. And then our souls who are with Christ, they're going to meet those bodies, and we're going to have resurrection bodies. We're going to have glorified bodies. Because see, Christ was the example, and it was his real body that resurrected and became glorified, right? Verse 20, but now is Christ risen from the dead and became the first fruits. That means the very first one of them that slept. And let me tell you something about the term slept. In the New Testament, this means, well, even in the Old Testament, they'll say he slept with his fathers. It means he died. But I want to tell you something. It's only used in reference to believers, that terminology. All right, back to John. Verse 3. Therefore his sister sent unto him, that means Christ, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. So, of course, they know that Christ loves him, but they kind of put that in there just a little bit. Don't forget, you love this guy. You know, they kind of put that in there. But what they did was they sent a messenger. And then we're going to get to the days, about how many days he was in the tomb and how this timeline works out. So we said before he was beyond Jordan. Well, Mary and Martha actually didn't know where he was. He didn't like stop off and say, hey, this is where I'm going. He was getting away for his life, him and his disciples. So they're in a place where Mary and Martha don't even know where he's at. So they send a messenger, and it's only a day's journey, but who knows how long it took him to find Christ. But what we discover from the timeline is that by the time he got to Christ, Lazarus had already been dead and buried. Yeah, he must have just gone really quick. When Jesus heard that, the messenger, he said, this sickness is not unto death. Not that he didn't die, but mean it's not permanent. He's not going to stay dead. That's what he means by that. But it's for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Okay, so he was sick and died. You know, a lot of people think that when somebody gets sick, or even if they get sick and die, oh, well, maybe God's not with them, or they would have recovered, you know. But it's not true. You can't tell by what's happening with a person when you think about Job whether God loves them or not. There's no way for you to tell. There's no way for you to make that judgment. And we're not supposed to make any judgments about stuff like that. But you can't, because you don't know. That's what Job's friends did. Oh, you must be a sinner. You must have committed some... And he didn't. God allowed that to happen. The other thing about this messenger is that Christ doesn't come back there immediately. Obviously, Lazarus is already dead. Do you ever wonder why God doesn't answer your prayers the way you want him to answer them? I wonder. Yeah. But you know what? His timing is not our timing. Not at all. But his timing is the right timing, and that's something we're going to discover in this. Verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So they had a really tight relationship. They were like his best friends. Then why did he let them suffer? Why did he let Lazarus die? Why did he let these sisters have to watch him take his last breath? suffering. Some people might say, well, that wasn't very nice of God. But you know what? Everybody has to pay a price when God is doing a work, and you may be the one paying that price. Going through suffering so God can do something glorious. And that's what's happening right here. Verse 6, when he had heard that Lazarus was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. So I'm going to tell you how this worked out. Because when he gets there, Lazarus is going to have been dead 4 days. Mm-hmm. So the messenger gets there. It's about 18 miles. So the messenger gets there. It could have taken him 2 days because even though he could get there, he doesn't know where they're at. They could have been in an isolated mountain area. Who knows? So in the meantime, Lazarus dies. And then Jesus waits 2 days. That's 3 days. And then when he takes the journey back to Bethany, that's 4 days. So he was in the grave for 4 days. And I want to tell you something about that. Jews believed, now this is not true, but they believed it. People believe a lot of things that aren't true. And this was like a tradition that they believed. That for 3 days after a person died, the soul would kind of hover around and wait to see if he could get back in the body. But they felt like on the 4th day, that's it. That soul's departing. And so because of this belief that they had, it could have been that Jesus waited 4 days until he was good and dead. Mm-hmm. Right? Then verse 7, it says, then after that, meaning after the 2 days had passed, he said to his disciples, let us go unto Judea again. Now, you know what? Just remember what happened when he left. He was escaping for his life. Mm-hmm. These people were hostile. Mm-hmm. They were evil. They wanted to kill him. They wanted to stone him. They wanted to shut him up permanently. So the fact that Jesus is even going back there, I mean, that's in a very close vicinity. That's why he says Judea. He's going back to that area. And his disciples saying to him, verse 8, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee. Where are you going to go again? They're like, what do you want to do? Cut off your ministry? Mm-hmm. You're just going into a volcano. Why would you do that on purpose? Jesus tells them a little kind of a parable. And Jesus answered in verse 9, aren't there 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbles not, because he can see the light of this world. But if a man walk in the night, he stumbles because there is no light in him. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what that means. When he says there's 12 hours in a day, referring to time. He refers to 3 things in this little saying. He refers to time, and he refers to light, and he refers to night. And the time that he's talking about, when he gives a specific time like 12 hours, hey, that can't be changed. When the sun goes down, it's down. What he's really talking about is his ministry. I've got to do it in this certain time frame. So he says, while it is day, he must complete the mission that God's appointed to him. And then he compares this to like people actually working in those days. They would work during the day. They wouldn't work at night because, you know, you'd stumble around. But there's also a spiritual meaning here. We have a command from God. We all have a life that he wants us to live. And we got to do it while it's day, meaning we have a time frame. And in the night, what that's speaking about is somebody who's not following the light of the world. That's a dangerous place to be. When you are not following the light of the world, who knows what you're going to stumble over. Right. You know? There was something I wanted to read here earlier. It was about Jesus loving Lazarus and loving us. This is J. Vernon McGee's Through the Bible. Jesus loved Lazarus when he was sick. Not only that, he would let him die, but he still loves him. He loves you when you are sick. He loves you when you're well. He loves you all the time. You can't keep him from loving you. You may ask why he let certain difficulties happen to you. I don't know the reason, but I know he loves you. He loves you whether or not you are a Christian. You can't keep him from loving you. You can't stop the sun from shining, but you can get out of the sunshine. You can put up an umbrella to keep the love of God from shining on your life. That's a really good illustration, and it's similar to this about the daytime and the sun. You cannot stop God from loving you, but you can get away from the sun. That's what I would call like the prodigal son. But the thing to remember what McGee said there about he loves you when you're sick. He loves you when you're fallen away. The wonderful thing about that story, the prodigal son, he's still a son. When he's out there in the pig pen, he is still a son. He's never referred to as a reject. The Father always loved him as a son. And Jesus can hear a sheep out there bleeding. Help me. He hears that and he goes to that. Okay, so that's the explanation of that parable. Oh, also, before he healed the blind man in chapter 9, he said something similar to this. I must work while it is day, for the night cometh when no man can work. So he uses these basic symbols that everybody of every race and every age can understand. Night and day, you know, everybody understands that. Then verse 11. These things said he, and after that he said unto them, his disciples, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I'm going that I can wake him out of his sleep. Now these disciples weren't too familiar with that way of speaking, and so the disciples said, Lord, if he's sleeping, then he's doing well. They're thinking sleeping like taking a nap. Though Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had just spoken of taking a rest and sleep. Then Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Nevertheless, let's go to him. So, you know, he's always caring for these disciples. He's always teaching his disciples. So this whole event of raising Lazarus is not just for the sisters. It's not just for everyone in the whole area to see. It's for his own disciples. I know after the miracle at Cana, it says his disciples believed on him. He's giving them more and more reasons to believe on him because they're going to need that faith because they're all going to be martyrs except John. They're going to need that faith in him. Then said Thomas, this is verse 16. We all know who Thomas is, right? Okay, he's got this reputation of the doubting Thomas. It's like part of his name, but you know what? He did something wonderful here. Let me start that over again. Verse 16. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus. That means the twin. He was a twin. And you know what he says? Let us go also, that we may die with him. That guy was willing to die. He's thinking, we all know what's going to happen when he goes back to Judea. They're going to kill him. And he says this to the other disciples. Let's go with him. Do you know what I want to tell you something about Thomas? During his ministry after Christ died, all the disciples basically went to different areas. And the area that he preached was Parthia and India. And he ended up in India and he died a martyr there with a sword.
Wow.
This man, I don't like calling him the doubter. There's nothing wrong with somebody asking for proof of anything. There really isn't. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm so glad that this is in the Bible, because it shows how much, even though he wasn't thinking of the Messiah setting up his kingdom, he was thinking Jesus was going to die. But hey, Jesus said he was going to die. He told him that. So God bless him for having that kind of faith and trying to muster up with the other disciples, let's just go die if that's what's going to happen to him. Okay, that's my lesson.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Does anyone have any questions?